Number 7. Ways to increase your aura. You're laughing at jokes that aren't funny, rushing through spaces like you're late to your own life, explaining yourself to people who didn't ask, and wondering why nobody respects you. You're performing, you're people-pleasing, you're adjusting yourself to fit into every room you enter, and in doing so, you're making yourself forgettable, replaceable, ordinary. And here's what you need to understand. Aura isn't built through being liked. Aura is built through being respected. And respect doesn't come from accommodation, from agreeability, from making yourself smaller so others feel comfortable. Respect comes from standards, from boundaries, from the quiet refusal to bend just because everyone else is bending. The Stoics understood this completely. Marcus Aurelius ruled Rome, but he didn't perform for Rome. He didn't laugh at senators' jokes to gain favor, didn't rush to meet everyone's demands, didn't explain his decisions to people who lacked the wisdom to understand them. He moved through the world with deliberate calm, with standards that didn't shift based on who was watching, with the kind of presence that made people adjust to him, not the other way around. Epictetus was a slave, had no power, no position, no external status, and yet people traveled across the empire to learn from him. Why? Because he had something that couldn't be bought or performed. He had presence, he had gravity, he had the kind of self-possession that made you pay attention even when he was silent. And if you want that, if you want to be the person who walks into a room and shifts the energy without saying a word, who commands respect without demanding it, who makes people obsess over you while you genuinely couldn't care less, then you need to understand something fundamental. Aura is built through subtraction, not addition. It's not about doing more, it's about doing less. Less performing, less explaining, less accommodating. It's about becoming so grounded in yourself that you stop adjusting to the world and start making the world adjust to you. And these 7 principles, they're not tricks. They're not tactics. They're behaviors that separate people with presence from people who are desperate to be seen. So let me show you exactly how this works. The first way to increase your aura is to never laugh at jokes that aren't funny. This sounds simple, almost trivial, but it's one of the clearest tests of whether you're living for yourself or performing for others. Because when you laugh at something that isn't funny, when you force a smile, when you give a reaction, you don't actually feel. You're not being polite. You're being dishonest. You're showing everyone in the room that your responses are for sale, that you'll perform whatever emotion gets you acceptance, that your authenticity is negotiable, and that performance, that willingness to fake reactions for social acceptance, it destroys your presence. It shows that you're controllable, that you're seeking approval, that you value being liked more than being real. And people can sense that. They can sense when someone's genuine and when someone's performing. And performance, no matter how good, will never have the magnetic pull of authenticity. Here's what happens when you laugh at jokes that aren't funny. Someone makes a weak joke, a forced joke, something that's clearly trying too hard, and everyone else laughs. And you look around, you see everyone laughing, and you join in. Not because it was funny, but because everyone else is doing it. Because not laughing would make you stand out, would make you seem difficult, would risk the social approval you're unconsciously seeking. So you laugh. You perform the reaction you think is expected, and in that moment you've shown something crucial about yourself. That your responses aren't your own. They're borrowed. They're based on what others are doing, not on what you actually feel. And that disconnect, that gap between what you feel and what you display, that's what kills aura. Because aura comes from coherence, from alignment between internal and external. And when you're performing reactions you don't feel, that alignment is gone. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." And laughing at jokes that aren't funny just because everyone else is laughing, that's choosing the majority over sanity. That's choosing social acceptance over authenticity. And that choice, repeated over and over in small moments like this, it builds a pattern. It builds the habit of performing instead of being. And performance doesn't create aura. Presence creates aura. And presence requires that your external responses match your internal experience. I've watched someone completely transform how people treated them by simply stopping the fake laughter. They used to be the person who laughed at everything, who gave the expected reactions, who performed agreeability, and they stopped. Someone would make a joke that wasn't funny, and instead of forcing a laugh, they'd just give a slight smile or no reaction at all. And at first, it was uncomfortable. People noticed. People would look at them, wondering why they weren't laughing. But they held the boundary. They only laughed when something was actually funny. And something interesting happened. People started working harder to make them laugh. People started valuing their genuine reactions more, because those reactions couldn't be faked, couldn't be bought with weak humor. And their presence grew, not because they became mean or difficult, but because they became real. And real is magnetic in a world full of performance. The second way to increase your aura is to walk slower than everyone else, like time bends for you only. This is about pace, about energy, about the message your movement sends to everyone watching. And most people move through the world like they're late, like they're chasing something, like they're trying to keep up with a pace set by everyone else. They rush, they hurry, they move with frantic energy that broadcasts one clear message. I'm not in control. I'm reacting. I'm being pushed by forces outside myself. And that rushed energy, that sense of being controlled by time rather than controlling it, that kills aura. Because aura comes from the sense that you're the center, that you're the one setting the pace, that time adjusts to you rather than you adjusting to time. Here's what rushing looks like and what it communicates. You're walking somewhere and you're moving fast, head down, focused on getting there. You're weaving through people, checking your watch, mentally already at the destination instead of being present in the movement. And everyone who sees you moving like that, they read it instantly. They see someone who's being controlled by time, who's reactive, who's anxious about being late, about missing something, about not being where they're supposed to be. And that energy, that rushed, reactive energy, it repels. It makes you forgettable because you're moving like everyone else, at the pace everyone else is moving. And there's nothing distinct, nothing memorable, nothing magnetic about that. But when you walk slower than everyone else, when you move with deliberate calm, when your pace is set by you and not by the urgency around you, you create a completely different energy. You create the sense that you're not being pushed by external forces, that you're not reactive, that you have all the time in the world because time adjusts to you, not the other way around. And that calm, that deliberate movement, it's magnetic. People notice it, people feel it. Because in a world where everyone's rushing, the person who's calm stands out. The person who moves like they have nowhere to be, even when they do, that person has presence. Marcus Aurelius moved through Rome with deliberate calm. Even in crisis, even when urgent decisions needed to be made, he didn't rush. He moved with the pace of someone who understood that rushing creates mistakes, creates panic, creates the sense that you're being controlled rather than controlling. And that deliberate movement, that refusal to be pushed by external urgency, it created immense presence. People knew that when Marcus moved, it was because he'd decided to move, not because circumstances were pushing him. And that sense of being in control, of setting the pace, that's what creates aura. I know someone who transformed their entire presence by simply slowing down. They used to rush everywhere, always moving fast, always in a hurry. And they started practicing walking slower. Not lazily, not without purpose, but deliberately. Like every step was chosen, like they had all the time in the world. And people started noticing, started getting out of their way, started treating them differently, because that slow, deliberate movement communicated something powerful. This person is not reactive. This person is not being pushed. This person sets their own pace. And that message, that energy, it created respect, created presence, created aura. The third way to increase your aura is to give zero chances when people disrespect you. This is about boundaries, about standards, about the immediate and non-negotiable consequence when someone crosses a line. And most people, they give chances. They tolerate disrespect once, thinking maybe it was a mistake, maybe the person was having a bad day, maybe they deserve another opportunity. And that tolerance, that willingness to accept disrespect even once, it teaches people exactly how to treat you. It teaches them that your boundaries are suggestions, that your standards are negotiable, that you'll accept poor treatment if they just push hard enough or apologize afterward. And that teaching, that message, it destroys respect, because respect isn't built through forgiveness of boundary violations. Respect is built through immediate, consistent enforcement of standards. Here's what giving chances looks like and what it costs you. Someone disrespects you. Maybe they insult you. Maybe they violate a boundary you've set. Maybe they treat you in a way that's clearly beneath your standards. And instead of addressing it immediately, instead of enforcing the consequence, you let it slide. You tell yourself it's not worth the conflict. It's not that big of a deal. Maybe they didn't mean it. So you give them a chance. And what happens? They do it again, because you taught them they could. You taught them that your boundaries aren't real, that your standards don't have teeth, that disrespecting you comes with no real consequence. And each time you tolerate it, each time you give another chance, you're training them to continue the behavior while simultaneously destroying any respect they might have had for you. Marcus Aurelius dealt with constant disrespect, constant challenge to his authority, constant testing of his boundaries. And he didn't give chances, not out of cruelty, not out of ego, but out of understanding that respect requires consequences. When someone violated the standards, when someone showed disrespect, the consequence was immediate. Not dramatic, not vengeful, just clear. You don't get access anymore. You don't get trust anymore. You don't get the relationship anymore. And that clarity, that immediate enforcement, it created respect, because people knew that boundaries were real, that standards were enforced. That disrespect wasn't tolerated even once. I've watched people completely transform their relationships by implementing zero tolerance for disrespect. Someone who used to tolerate boundary violations, who used to give chances, who used to accept disrespect and hope it would change. And they stopped. Someone disrespected them once and it was over. Not with drama, not with anger, just with clarity. You're done. You don't get access anymore. And at first, some people were shocked. Some people tried to apologize, tried to get another chance. But the boundary held. And the people who stayed, the people who never disrespected them in the first place, those relationships deepened. Because now they knew the standard was real. And the person who enforced that standard, their presence grew. Because they'd shown they valued themselves enough to have non-negotiable boundaries. So here's the practice. Define what disrespect looks like to you. And when someone crosses that line, even once, the consequence is immediate and final. They don't get another chance. They don't get to apologize their way back in. They're done. Not because you're cruel, not because you're unforgiving, but because you respect yourself enough to enforce your standards. And that enforcement, that zero tolerance, it creates the kind of presence that makes people very careful about how they treat you, because they know there are no second chances. And that knowledge creates respect. The fourth way to increase your aura is no panicking, ever. This is about emotional control, about being unshakable, about maintaining composure when everyone else is losing theirs. And most people panic When something goes wrong, when pressure increases, when the unexpected happens, they react. Their energy shifts, their composure breaks, their calm disappears, and they become visibly affected by circumstances. And that panic, that loss of control, it destroys any sense of presence. Because presence comes from stability, from being the calm in the storm, from being the person who doesn't get rattled when things go wrong. And when you panic, when you visibly lose composure, you're showing everyone that external events control your internal state. And being controlled, being reactive, being shakeable, that's the opposite of aura. Here's what panicking looks like and what it broadcasts. Something goes wrong. A problem emerges. A plan falls apart. An unexpected challenge appears. And immediately your energy changes. Your voice gets tense. Your movements get frantic. Your face shows stress. You start rushing, start making reactive decisions. Start showing everyone around you that you're affected, that you're rattled, that you're losing control. And everyone who sees that, everyone who witnesses that shift from calm to panic, they lose respect. Not consciously maybe, but instinctively, because humans are wired to follow calm leaders and abandon panicked ones. And when you panic, when you lose composure, you're showing that you're not the calm leader. You're showing that you're just as reactive and controllable as everyone else. I know someone who built their entire reputation on never panicking. They worked in high-pressure situations where things went wrong constantly, where panic was the normal response. And they never showed it, never rushed, never got frantic, never let the pressure change their energy. And people started treating them like a leader, even when they had no official authority. Because in moments of crisis, everyone looks for the calm person. Everyone looks for the one who's not panicking. And when you're that person, when you maintain composure while everyone else is losing theirs, you become the center. You become the reference point. You become the one with presence. Epictetus taught that we should distinguish between what's in our control and what's not. And external events, problems, unexpected challenges, those aren't in your control. But your response is. Your composure is. Your decision to stay calm instead of panicking is. And when you master that, when you can face crisis without losing calm, when you can maintain composure while everything around you is chaos, you become unshakable. And unshakable is magnetic. Unshakable has aura. So here's the practice. When something goes wrong, when pressure hits, when the unexpected happens, pause. Don't react immediately. Take a breath and maintain your energy. Don't let the external event change your internal state. Don't show panic. Don't show stress. Don't let anyone see you rattled. Not because you're hiding your emotions, but because you're controlling them. Because you've decided that external chaos doesn't determine internal calm. And that decision, that practice of no panicking ever, it builds the kind of presence that makes people look to you in crisis, because they know you won't break. And that stability, that unshakable calm, that's what creates aura. The fifth way to increase your aura is to stop explaining yourself. This is about confidence, about certainty, about the understanding that your decisions don't require justification to people who didn't earn the right to question them. And most people over-explain everything. They make a decision and then they explain why. They justify it. They make sure everyone understands their reasoning. They defend their choices before anyone even challenges them. And that explanation, that justification, it's not clarity, it's insecurity. It's the broadcast that you're not fully confident in your own decisions, that you need others to validate them, that you're seeking approval for choices you've already made. And that seeking, that need for validation through explanation, it destroys presence. Or because presence comes from certainty, and certainty doesn't explain itself. Here's what over-explaining looks like. You make a decision, any decision, and before anyone asks, you're explaining. You're giving the reasons, the justifications, the full breakdown of your thought process. You're making sure everyone understands why you chose what you chose, why it makes sense, why it's the right call. And all of that explanation, all of that justification, it's not helping anyone understand you better. It's showing them that you're not fully confident in your own choice. Because if you were confident, if you were certain, you wouldn't need to explain. You'd just do it and let the results speak. But instead, you're seeking pre-approval, seeking validation, seeking confirmation that your decision is okay. And that seeking, that need for others to confirm your choices, it shows weakness. It shows that you don't fully trust yourself. Marcus Aurelius made decisions constantly, decisions about war, about policy, about justice, about the empire, and he didn't explain them to everyone. He didn't justify his choices to people who lacked the context, the wisdom, the perspective to understand them. He made the decision and executed it. And if someone with the standing and wisdom to question it asked, then maybe he'd explain. But he didn't preemptively justify his choices to everyone who might have an opinion, because he understood that explaining yourself to everyone is giving everyone power over you. It's making your decisions subject to their approval, and decisions subject to approval aren't really yours. They're committee decisions. And committee decisions don't create presence. Certainty creates presence. I've watched people transform how others treat them by simply stopping the explanations. Someone who used to justify every choice, who used to make sure everyone understood their reasoning, who used to defend their decisions before anyone challenged them. And they stopped. They made choices and didn't explain. When people asked why, they'd say, "Because I decided to," or "Because that's what I'm doing," and nothing more. And at first, people were uncomfortable with it. They wanted the explanation, wanted the justification, wanted to understand, but it didn't come. And people started respecting them more, started treating their decisions as final instead of negotiable, started recognizing that this person didn't need approval, didn't need validation, didn't need anyone's permission. And that independence, that certainty, it created presence. Seneca wrote that a person who needs to explain themselves to everyone is a person who doesn't fully believe in themselves. And when you stop explaining, when you make decisions and execute them without needing to justify them to people who didn't ask and don't deserve the explanation, you're showing something powerful. I trust myself. I don't need your approval. My decisions are mine. And that trust, that self-reliance, it's magnetic. It creates the sense that you know what you're doing, that you're confident in your path, that you don't need external validation to move forward. And that confidence, that certainty, that's aura. So here's the practice. Stop explaining yourself unless specifically asked by someone who's earned the right to ask. Make your decisions and execute them without justification. When people wonder why you did something, let them wonder. You don't owe anyone an explanation for choices that are yours to make. And in that refusal to justify, in that comfort with letting others not understand, you build the kind of presence that comes from certainty, because certain people don't explain. They just do. And doing without explaining, that's power, that's aura. The sixth way to increase your aura is to speak half the words but make them meaningful. This is about verbal economy, about the understanding that words lose power through volume. And most people talk too much. They fill every silence, they explain every thought. They give their opinion on everything, whether it's asked for or not. And that constant talking, that verbal excess, it dilutes their presence. It makes their words meaningless, because if you're always talking, nothing you say carries weight. It's just background noise. But when you speak half as much, when every word is chosen, when you only speak when you have something worth saying, your words gain power. People listen differently. People lean in. People pay attention because they know that when you speak, it matters. Here's what speaking too much looks like. You're in a conversation and you feel the need to fill every pause, to contribute to every topic, to make sure people know you're present and engaged. So you talk. You share thoughts that aren't fully formed, observations that aren't particularly insightful, reactions to everything being discussed. And the more you talk, the less people listen, because you've trained them that most of what you say isn't essential, that you're just filling space. And when you do have something important to say, something that actually matters, it gets lost in all the other words, because you've diluted your own impact through volume. Marcus Aurelius was known for his economy of words. He spoke when he needed to speak, when his words would add value, when what he had to say was worth the air it took to say it. And because he spoke rarely, when he did speak, everyone listened. His words carried weight because they were scarce, because people knew that if Marcus was speaking, it was because what he had to say mattered. And that scarcity, that selectivity, it amplified his presence, made his words powerful, made people value what he said because it was rare. I know someone who transformed their influence by cutting their speaking in half. They used to be the person who always had something to say, who contributed to every conversation, who never let a silence sit, and they started practicing verbal economy. They started only speaking when they had something that genuinely added value, when they had insight that others didn't have, perspective that changed the conversation, or something that actually needed to be said. And the rest of the time, they were silent. They listened. They observed. They let others fill the space. And within weeks, people started valuing their words differently, started listening more carefully when they spoke, started seeking their input specifically because they knew it wouldn't be wasted words, and their presence grew, not because they said more profound things, but because they said fewer things, and fewer. But chosen words carry more weight than constant talking ever will. Epictetus taught that we should be slow to speak and quick to listen, and the reason is simple. Listening makes you wise. Speaking makes you vulnerable. Every word you say is information you've given away, perspective you've revealed, an opportunity for others to judge, to disagree, to use against you. But when you speak rarely, when your words are few but meaningful, you protect yourself while amplifying your impact. Because scarcity creates value, and scarce words, carefully chosen words, words that actually matter, those are valuable. Those create presence. So here's the practice. Before you speak, ask yourself if what you're about to say adds value, if it's insight others don't have, if it's something that genuinely needs to be said, if it will change the conversation in a meaningful way. And if the answer is no, don't say it. Let the silence sit. Let others fill the space. And only speak when your words will actually matter. And in that selectivity, in that verbal economy, your words will gain power. And powerful words, rare words, meaningful words, those create aura. Because aura isn't loud. Aura is the quiet voice that everyone stops to hear. The seventh and most important way to increase your aura is to stop caring what they think. Genuinely, not just pretending. Real indifference is magnetic, and that's when they obsess over you. This is the culmination of everything else, the final piece that makes all the other principles work. Because you can master all 6 previous principles, but if you're doing them to impress people, now if you're performing indifference while secretly caring deeply about what others think, it won't work. People can sense the difference between real indifference and performed indifference. Real indifference is magnetic because it's authentic, because it comes from genuine self-sufficiency, because you truly don't need their approval. Performed indifference is transparent because underneath it, you're still seeking validation, still caring what they think, still adjusting yourself based on their reactions. And that gap between what you're showing and what you're feeling, that inauthenticity, it destroys everything. Here's what performed indifference looks like. You act like you don't care, you play it cool, you pretend to be unaffected, but underneath, you're watching. You're checking to see if they noticed, if they're reacting, if your indifference is creating the effect you want. You're not laughing at their jokes, but you're watching to see if they notice you're not laughing. You're walking slow, but you're aware of who's watching you walk. You're not explaining yourself, but you're tracking whether your lack of explanation is creating intrigue. And that tracking, that awareness, that secret caring while pretending not to care, that's not indifference, that's manipulation. And manipulation doesn't create aura, it creates performance. And performance can be seen through. Real indifference is completely different. Real indifference is when you genuinely don't care if they laugh, if they notice, if they approve, if they understand. You're not tracking their reactions because their reactions don't matter to you. You're not performing behaviors to create effects. You're simply being yourself, and whatever they make of it is their business, not yours. You're not walking slow to be noticed. You're walking slow because that's your pace. You're not withholding explanation to create mystery. You're withholding explanation because you don't need their understanding. And that authenticity, that genuine lack of need for their validation, that's what's magnetic, because it's real. Because people can sense that you truly don't need them. And the moment they sense you don't need them, they want to know why. They want to understand what makes you so complete that their approval doesn't matter. And that curiosity, that intrigue, that's when they start obsessing. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." And the person with real aura has broken that pattern. They care more about their own opinion than anyone else's. They validate themselves through their own standards, their own principles, their own assessment of whether they showed up as who they want to be. And other people's opinions, other people's judgments, other people's reactions, those are just noise. Interesting maybe, occasionally useful as information, but never determinative of worth. I've watched people transform completely when they made this shift from performed indifference to real indifference. Someone who was playing the game, doing all the right behaviors but still secretly caring what everyone thought. And something clicked. They stopped caring, not performing, not caring, actually not caring, and everything changed. Because now the behaviors weren't tactics, they were just who they were. They weren't walking slow to be noticed, they were walking slow because they were grounded. They weren't withholding words to create mystery, they were selective because most things weren't worth saying, and people noticed the difference, the authenticity, the realness. And they became obsessed because you can't manipulate someone who genuinely doesn't care what you think. You can't control someone who doesn't need your approval. And that independence, that immunity to social manipulation, it's rare. And rare is valuable. Epictetus taught that freedom is the only worthy goal in life. And real freedom comes from not needing anything from others. Not their approval, not their validation, not their understanding. When you're truly free, when you're genuinely indifferent to their opinions, you can't be controlled. You can't be manipulated. You can't be swayed by social pressure. And that freedom, that sovereignty, it's the ultimate form of power. Because power that can be taken isn't real power, but power that comes from genuine self-sufficiency, from not needing anyone's approval to know your worth. That can't be taken. That's yours. And that authenticity, that alignment between who you are internally and how you show up externally, that's what creates real aura, not the performance of these behaviors, but the genuine embodiment of them. Not doing them to be noticed, but being someone for whom these behaviors are natural, because you've built something inside yourself that doesn't need external validation, doesn't react to external pressure, doesn't bend to social expectation,